So when I was first invited to be here, I think it was in the winter, last winter, and I was about 7 months pregnant. So when I thought about coming tonight, I was like, I'm not going to read from my book, which was published last year. I'm going to have all new work, because I've read in Ottawa a couple of times. I want to keep it fresh. And then I actually had the baby, and time just fell into a black hole. Honestly, my conception of time is totally different now. So there's no new work. So I'll be reading from my book. And in honor of being a new mother, I decided to start with a few poems about my own mom. So my mom says that the first time my father ever insulted her, and I should say that they're happily married still, was on their honeymoon. And the insult was that she was a convenient Christian. And when my mother recounts this story, she says, well, I am a convenient Christian, but it's not nice to say that to me. So this is about my mother's convenient Christianity. It's called Witness. I see this lady going door to door with an armful of pamphlets. I'd like to be that sure of anything. At a funeral, my mother took me aside. I believe when I die, I'm going up there. She pointed to the stucco ceiling of the funeral home, her other hand clutching a dry brownie wrapped in a white doily, and all the people I love. She said it pleading-like, self-mocking, too intelligent for God, like the rest of us. As if I wouldn't want her to have that. I want her to have that. I sat next to a bouquet on the car ride home, its sick, sweet smell like the thinning perms that bobbed in the sparse pews. I didn't know what to do when they bowed their heads. I kept my eyes on the bald minister who looked like 80s Florida, and while everyone around me broke down, I was on a plane to Miami. Photograph of mother. Your childhood yard is an explosion of rust and weeds backed by clapboard and peeling paint. Poverty acid-dropped the landscape. Ragged chickens, desire hung to dry, the men drinking and picking fights, the women worn right through. Let's not get dramatic. You still had tea parties in the garden with paper dolls made from pictures of models you'd snipped from Sears catalogs. In your thinning dress, squinting at the world beyond your yard, you willed better, saw the earth's betrayal, all your ancestors tilling to empty, digging up nothing but grief. You would choose subways and concrete, teach kids to read, make paper money, buy every packaged item in the gleam of the grocery store. So this next one is about the generation of women above that. This is about my mother's mother, my grandmother. And she was a really marvelous woman. She was born in England. She lived in India for a while. She lived in Montreal. And then when she got married, she moved to a very small town. It was a town of about 400 people. And I think it was pretty difficult for her, but she made the best of it. She was quite the flirt. She once pinched a man's bum in line at the bank in front of her when she was like 85 years old, and when he turned around, she said, I couldn't help myself, I'm sorry. So this is the type of stock that I come from. I don't know how to feel about that, but this poem is called Margaret Hanna. My grandmother had land, and she sat on her porch looking at it, a well of rage in her. You don't understand. She was happy. She was the happiest person I knew. Her husband had flipped his truck one night, beers in him, a death at the kitchen table. The kitchen table was still there the next morning. The wood stove was still there. His grave is in the churchyard next door. She too is there. Her mind went long before her body. I did not grieve her flesh. There's a road allowance to a hill behind her house. I walk it, stand at the top, walk back to the house. Another family lives there. The heavy black furniture and oil paintings. It was a lot to clear. So when I found out that I was pregnant, I thought a lot about if I had a girl, how I was going to raise her to negotiate the hyper-objectification of women by men and some other women that I think happens in our society. And it seemed pretty impossible. Then I found out that I was having a boy, and I faced an even bigger challenge. How would I raise a boy that wouldn't perpetuate the male gaze? And I'm not sure that I have the answer to that. He's only like 5 months old, but I'm working on it. This poem is called Butte. I'm neat in short shorts. Or I used to think men thought so. Until I met you and your smartphone, which you'd rather be ogling than me neat in anything. It makes me wonder if men looking is just a routine, like exercise, and how pathetic I am to hope for and shine in it, should I want it. I rarely do. Women file shining under accomplishment. Fuck accomplishment. On a summer morning in short shorts, I watch pallbearers carry a coffin down a flight of church steps. I sip my morning latte. The guy next to me says, it's a little early for this, and I am supposed to agree. But I shake my head. Imagine this. All the mourners after, feasting together. Is that beautiful? At this bar in Chinookville, young men on MDMA, one of them looks at me like I'm a piece of sky, then shuts his eyes. There was a beach beyond that bar, and I sat on it watching lightning, thinking beauty should mostly be someone making that spectacle inside you. Photograph. You tell me to look into the lens, which I think of as your mouth. The air is heavy with appetite. You adjust my head with 2 fingers, brush the hair from my face, tell me part your lips, part your knees. The woman you're watching, what does she look like? And did we both have you? You like her, I know. You'll develop her, a bit of generosity. This poem is called Richard Gere's Grand Piano. And I just want to say that I miss Richard Gere. He used to be in like every movie when I was growing up, but he's not really around anymore. Here. This is it. You're a waitress. You bring people French toast and bacon. You can't pay the hydro bill. I used to think of you as somebody grand, like one of those pianos Edward fucked Vivian on in Pretty Woman. Maybe you are. Maybe your greatest talent is gleaming in empty foyers. So, like everyone else, I love social media, or most people. But I do worry, and I think this is a common concern for people, about how it pulls us out of the moment that we're experiencing. I know that's not an original thought, but this string of poems is about that. This one is called, I Am Riding Toward an Apocalypse, I Think It's Mine. Watch me on my bike, on Facebook, on Instagram. Watch the sun beat through a lawn tree. I want to go to sleep there and burn until it is quiet through me like woods, but even the woods are in perfect rows, planted by a man in boots, his back trembling. I saw him in a documentary. I call these thoughts death, but my death is no longer original. I saw it in a documentary. You already said that. Instagram. My lover's twin daughters draw me rainbows. I tape them to my walls, where they startle me. It's not enough. I need rousing abstractions of myself. The mirror is a failure, and small hearts can't touch mine. The nihilistic one loops her fingers through my knit sweater, says she wants to destroy it. I'm about to board a plane. The piece is more style than functional, so I respect her opinion. I can see your point, I want to tell her, but Dad beats me with, that's not nice. Shame springs from nice. a prickly beast. So you heart everything like a dumb bitch, and you wonder if real ever was, as the ground slips from under you. Victims. My man prepares elaborate dinners, takes time with them, bends over my plate at the table with a lime or dash of salt. Other women are aroused. I've already had my hands up the skirt, which I chose with malice, a different colt in mind. His children cut up construction paper hearts for me in the basement of the art gallery. It's psychological warfare. At home on the futon, they stretched their bodies over mine, kissed me with mouths of small teeth. I never should have agreed to braid their hair or clasp their barrettes. They checked my eyes for imagination. My ex reminds me in a telephone call how I once leaned to his ear at a wedding, the flower girl flouncing down the aisle. We all love a little girl in a pretty dress. When my son is here, by the way, just in the back. My mother-in-law is trying to make him not cry. But I guess when he's old enough to understand, he can't come to my poetry readings anymore. So I feel like when most people think about or talk about moving to a smaller city or somewhere in the country, they do it or they think about it because they think it's going to be more peaceful or more tranquil, more relaxing. But I've lived in some smaller cities and in the countryside, and I just find it extremely stressful mentally. I don't know why. I think coming from a city like Toronto, I find the isolation of the countryside really creepy. And I find that in small towns, I really hate that I lose my anonymity, and I really like my anonymity. So I'm going to read you a few poems that touch on that. The first one is called Small City, and it's about a year I spent living in London, Ontario. When I lived there, I roamed shopping malls on lunch break. They advertised Katy Perry was coming. I sat in Starbucks obsessing. The university kids couldn't tell, but the men on their computers could. I puppeted my arms for them, my mouth. One followed me home through a snowstorm. A snowstorm won't stop me. It was a declaration of psychopathy, like my moving was a declaration of psychopathy, and that word declaration, an icicle glinting in the infrequent sun. On one of those days, I felt we were living in a farmhouse. Dinner fresh from the oven, snow of violence spun for us, like fate was a thing we would die doing. Astro Cottage. Crickets chirp on the Jumbotron. The animals are mascots to your shotguns, to nature, which is 22 here and wearing a string bikini. I saw a deer raising herself from the meadow, but it was a beer ad about chugging cans as cold as lakes. It was a head on the cabin wall. It was the forest shuffling off. And the last one I'm going to read about the country is in 3 parts. It's called The County. The light lies on the lake for so long, it might never leave, until black gathers along the clothesline and beneath your hair, climbs up the deck stairs. When I was a child, dusk made me homesick for a resemblance. Before the film flickered on at the cottage drive-in, I'd whirl on the playground carousel and hope to die. The movies brought us other selves. My parents beside the car in lawn chairs, their faces unavailable. A bird slams the windshield. It lives but leaves feathers. I flick the wipers. Yesterday, a fox flashed in front of my car to cup a rabbit in its jaw. So a few years ago, actually it was several years ago now, I was in Egypt visiting a friend of mine who lives in Cairo. And she took me to this coastal town, which is a really popular vacation spot for Egyptians. And they had this section of the beach that was cordoned off for women only. So women who covered themselves could go there and not have to worry about men looking at them, and they could just strip down to their bikinis. And it was one of the most surreal experiences and instructive experiences I've had in my lifetime, because I was lined up at these turnstiles to go into this beach that with women that were covered head to toe, and we went through the turnstile, and then it was just all these young women in bikinis like you would see here. And it taught me a lot about the two different ways that I have been taught to dehumanize women. So this is about that. It's called Women Only Beach, Porto Marina, Egypt. Folds and folds of black cloth drop, and suddenly, a woman. I watch from my rented chaise lounge as she runs to the sea like any other pussy on stilts, like me. In the water, she opens and closes her legs to let the flow in and out, and back to the cargo ships with their working men and steel containers. Okay, I'm just going to read a few more. These two poems are from a short series in my book that are based on things that I've heard people say out in the real world. So I used to go around and if I heard a stranger say something interesting, or if a friend said something interesting to me, I'd copy it down verbatim, and then I'd go home and write a poem based on it. And I still love doing this because I find that the things people say just offhand in everyday life are more wonderful than anything you'll ever read in a book. So how they work is the title of the poem first gives you the location where I heard the thing said, then it gives you the identity of the speaker, then it gives the thing I heard said, and then it goes into the poem. So this one is called Trinity Bellwoods Park, Girl, and the thing I heard said was, Rachel, your bush is showing. You're not wearing any underwear. Her body leans into the grass with its bright legs and high-waisted floral jumper comeback. She spreads her fingers around a Pabst Blue ribbon and lifts her face. She doesn't know she's an American Apparel mannequin or a woman with a body she's learning. She wants every boy in the park and none. Yesterday, she sat in front of the mirror brushing her hair, wondering what belongs to her. She presents herself to the world like an art show. Different concepts behind each look, hoping the critics will elaborate. Her last boyfriend wanted it bare. And then the last one is called King West, Brian. And what Brian said to me was, Melissa will probably want to do something domestic tomorrow, like go to IKEA. Will she suck his cock today? They make purchases together. White mugs and shower curtains, and he asks about the wine she's chosen for their dinner party. And she goes on wearing her dark wash jeans. And when an explosion of color suddenly leaps from the fog between them, out from that spot in her mind that is still hers, still free from some ad on TV, direct from the sparking edge of her teeth she bears up from his lap, he almost, just for a second, loses his heart-on. Lives inside the gentle arch of her hand on his knee, the horse muscle of her neck. Thank you so much for listening.